Lesson 7 is focusing on percents, decimals, and fractions and kind of converting from one to the other. So the first thing is percents. We haven't talked about percents. So let's look at that first. So percents basically means per 100. So whenever you're saying like 12%, it means 12 per 100. So it automatically is comparing it to 100. So writing a number as a percent is a way of comparing the number with 100. So let's look at some examples of what a percent is. So first of all, we have percent. So like I said, if we said 42%, that's the same thing as saying 42 per 100. So it's automatically compared to a fraction with 100 as a denominator. 6% is saying 6 per 100. If I say 160%, it's the same thing as saying 160 per 100. Okay. So another example is, well, how do we change a percent to a decimal? So if we want to change 35.2% to a decimal, basically what we're looking at, 35.2% is the same thing as saying 35.2 per 100, which is essentially the same thing as saying 35.2 divided by 100. So when we divide 35.2 by 100, let's see what we get. So let's go ahead and practice doing that. 35.2. Remember, we're going to carry that 2, or carry the decimal up. So we look at it as how many times does 100 go into 352? It's going to happen 3 times. So since the 3 is going, the 100's going into 352 3 times, the 3's got to go above this 2. So we multiply, we get 300. So we have 2, we get 5. So we have a remainder of 52. Now if you remember, we're going to try to keep going here so we can either get a decimal that repeats or ends, so we can kind of see what's happening. So I'm going to bring down that 0. 100 is going to go into 525 times. So we get 500. We're going to have 20 left over. Add another 0 to carry it down. So now we're looking at 100. How many times does it go into 200, which is 2, and that's going to happen an even number of times. So now we have a remainder of 0, which tells me that this decimal, 0.352, is the same thing as 35.2%, or the same thing as 35.2 over 100. So the shortcut, which some of you probably already know, is whenever you're converting from a percent to a decimal, all you need to do is think of it as moving the decimal to the left 2 places, because if you're dividing by 100, you're really changing 2 decimal places. So the shortcut for this is to just think of move the decimal 2 places to the left. So move decimal 2 places to the left. So if you look, I could have just moved this 2 places to the left and I would have gotten my answer. So percent to a decimal, we're just moving 2 places to the left. So let's look at some more examples. So if I have 25% and I want to convert that to a decimal, move it 2 places, move the decimal 2 places to the left. So right now the decimal is really here because it's 25, it's a whole number. So I'm going to get 0.25. So 75%. 2 places to the left would give me 0.75. If I have 6.8%, 2 places to the left, I'm now going to have 0.068 as a decimal. 0.4%. Move the decimal 2 places to the left because you're dividing by 100 is what you're really doing. So I have 0.0. Okay, so let's look at another example. What happens if we want to go the opposite direction? So what happens if I want to take a decimal and I want to turn it into a percent? Well, to go from a percent to a decimal, we divide by 100. So to go from a decimal to a percent, you're going to multiply by 100. You're going to do the opposite. So this means you're going to multiply by 100. Multiplying by 100 is the same thing as moving the decimal 2 places to the right. You're getting bigger, so you're going to the right. So move decimal 2 places to the right. So some examples of this. It's going to be, let's say we have 0.42. This will become, well, move the decimal 2 places to the right. Should be getting bigger. You're multiplying by 100. So this is the same thing as saying 42%. If we had 4.89, move 2 places to the right. So we get 489%. Another example, if we have 0.2, convert this, well, 2 places to the right is going to be 20%. If we have 0.09, 2 places to the right, so we're going to get 9%. And the last one, what happens if we start with the whole number? What if we start with 25? Well, really, the decimal is at the end. So if you go 2 places to the right, you're going to get 2,500%. And then for the last topic, what happens if we're going to change from fractions to percents? Or from percents to fractions? So for the first one, we're going to go from percents to fractions. And remember that percents really are fractions. They're just saying per 100. So if I started with 16%, this is the same exact thing as saying 16 per 100, which we already talked about. That's the definition of what a percent is. So to kind of give this as a final answer, we'd want to reduce. So if I divide the top and bottom here by 4, I'm going to end up with 4 over 25, which will be the fraction in simplest form. Let's look at another one, 23%. As a fraction, well, 23 over 100. And that doesn't reduce. 24%. So you start off with 24 over 100. Then you look at what can you divide by? Well, I can divide everything by 4, and I would get 6 over 25. Let's see. What if I had 4.5%? So this is the same thing as saying 4.5 per 100. And to think about reducing this, the easiest thing to do is to first move that 0.5, make it a whole number. So to do that, I need to move it 1 decimal place, which really means I'm multiplying everything by 10. So I need to add a decimal place. So I'm going to multiply everything by 10, or you can think of it as you're just moving the top over 1 decimal place, and then you have to move the bottom because the decimal is right here on the bottom. You're moving that over, so you're getting 1,000 on the bottom. So 4.5 over 100 is really the same thing as 45 over 1,000. And then when you want to reduce it, you could divide everything by 5. So you're going to get 9 on the top, and then on the bottom you'll get 200. So that would be reduced. Same with, let's look at one that looks a little bit different. What if I had 32.5%? Now, this is the same thing as saying 32.5 over 100. So you can think of this as, well, I can make it 32.5, but I want to show you what happens if you get a decimal that's not as nice as 0.5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this mixed number into an improper fraction. And if you remember how to do that, you multiply these two numbers and then you add what's left. So it's multiply and it's going to be add. So it's going to be 2 times 32 is going to give me 64. Add 1, we're going to get 65. And then you always just keep what's on the bottom, which is a 2. And then all of this is going over 100. And when we're dividing fractions, remember, we're keeping the top, changing the sign, and then we're flipping the bottom. So this is really 100 over 1. It's going to become 1 over 100. So this is going to become 65 over 200, which is the same thing as saying 13 over 40. And we get the 13 over 40 by dividing the top and bottom by 5. That's how I got that. Okay. And the last thing is going the opposite direction. So what happens now if you start with a fraction and you want to convert it to a percent? So let me just give you 2 examples of this. So if I start with a fraction 7 over tenths, and if I want to convert this into a percent, the easiest way to go is to a decimal first. And then from there, we just move the decimal place. So 7 divided by 10 is just going to be 0.7. And then once we have it as a decimal, to go from a decimal to a percent, it should be getting bigger, so you're moving it 2 places to the right. So this is going to be 70%. I'm just multiplying by 100. Another way of thinking of it, if I have something like this where I have 5/12, and I want to convert that into a percent, first thing you need to do is get it into a decimal. So let's look at how I divide it. The 7 over 10, most of you already know, is 7/10, so it's just 0.7. But for 5 over 12, you're probably not going to know the decimal off the top of your head, so you're going to actually have to go and divide it. So I'm going to be dividing 5 divided by 12. And this is a situation where you're going to want to add those zeros in right away because 12 doesn't go into 5. So you got to have your decimal point. And then I'm looking at 12 going into 50, so 4 times. So I get 48. When I multiply 4 times 12, I get 2 left over. I'm going to add a 0 in there. So now I have just 1 time 12 going into 20. So now I get 8. So how many times does 12 go into 80? So it's going to be 6 times. So 6 times 12 is going to give me 72. And I get 8. So now you're going to see that it's just going to keep repeating. Those 6's are just going to keep repeating. So these 6's will begin repeating. So 5 over 12 is the same thing as saying 0.4166 repeating 6's. So when I go to multiply this by 100, I'm really moving the decimal place over twice. So it's going to be 41.6% repeating 6's there. When you have a decimal of 0.6666, some of you know that as 2/3. That's the fraction. So you could also write it like that, 41 2/3%. You could also round it, 41.67, something like that. But there's a couple different ways that you can write that, and it really just depends on what the question's asking, and if it doesn't specify any of those is acceptable. Okay, so that's it for that section.